Deerling and Sawsbuck are two Pokemon that you would be forgiven for forgetting. They're not starters, they're not legendaries, they're not involved in any major storylines, but they're not necessarily filler. They serve a purpose and have fascinating design inspirations rooted in zoology and mythology, but yes, they're gimmick Pokemon, created to showcase a new gameplay mechanic introduced in the Black and White games, the changing of seasons. As the real-world year progresses, the in-game year progresses at a slightly different rate, with one actual calendar month signalling a new change in season in the Pokemon world. This would manifest in various different ways. The days would be shorter or longer, different weather conditions would be experienced, and one very noticeable difference would be in the changing forms that Deerling and Sawsbuck undergo. Taking a quick look at their Pokédex entries, Deerling states, "The turning of the seasons changes the colour and scent of this Pokemon's fur. People use it to mark the seasons." With Sawsbuck's reading, "The plants growing on its horns change according to the season. The leaders of the herd possess magnificent horns." So with this changing of the season being such a definable trait that it warrants being exclusively what they are known for in the Pokédex, there must be some markable differences between their forms, and there certainly are. As we can see with their spring forms, they both share a pink coloration, seen in Deerling's upper coat, and Sawsbuck having little pink splotches on its back, with a tuft of hair on its neck, and pink flowers growing out of its antlers. This pink coloration is representative of cherry blossoms, a richly symbolic flower, considered Japan's national flower. The blossoming of such signalling that spring has truly begun and the enduring ephemeral way of life continues on its course. When summer comes round, the true magnificence of life in the full throes of growth is mirrored in the rich verdant green coloration that both Pokemon share. The tuft of fur that was keeping Sawsbuck warm through the chilly spring months has now disappeared so as to stay cooler in these warmer climates, and has instead grown on the back of its head to protect the neck from that harsh, unrelenting sunshine. The antlers are now overgrown with a full quota of leaves, as of trees in the peak of their bloom. Autumn brings the palette of life in decline, the red and brown hues harking to the leaves as they fall from the trees, reaching the end of their life, with those typical autumnal colours being shown in Deerling's fur and the antlers of its evolution, the once rich tree now beginning to droop and sag as it slowly comes to the end of its seasonal cycle. The fur on its neck has made a reappearance, also having to wrap up as the days grow shorter and the temperature gets cooler. And finally, winter brings the most stark aesthetic change of them all, with Deerling the deep brown being the sight of trees devoid of life, the fields with their empty pastures as the grass and plants have rescinded from the cold. In Sawsbuck, its tree antlers are now bare, coloured white as if covered in snow. The tuft of neck fur has now become a magnificent scarf to keep it protected and warm in these harsh weathers, and the growth of new fur around its hooves, showing that it's been trudging through the snow and trying to keep its legs insulated. As we can see, they definitely fulfill their brief of being the seasoned Pokemon, for that's what they're officially classified as, but they are much more than just a pair of deer with a gameplay mechanic. There's a lot of real-world inspiration that's gone into their design. Let's take a closer look at Deerling. Starting off with its name, it's a portmanteau of the words deer, because it's very obviously based off a deer, and yearling, which denotes an animal only a year old. So from its name, you get a pretty good indication of what this Pokemon's about. It's a very young deer. Its original Japanese name, Shikachika, is a portmanteau of the word shiki, meaning 4 seasons, and shika, which translates to deer. Quite literally, a 4 seasons deer. But it's not as simple as being based on a generic deer. There are 43 species of Cervidae in the world, and from Deerling's appearance, we're able to deduce that it is in fact inspired by the Sika deer. Originally native across much of East Asia, they are now extinct in North and South Korea, with less than 1,000 in the wild in China and a cluster of approximately 9,000 left in Russia. However, the species' saving grace is Japan, where the Ministry of Environment estimates a whopping 3,080,000 deer wandering across the country. The reason for such huge numbers is the extinction of the deer's main predator, the Japanese wolf, over 100 years ago. And since then, the population has exploded, commonly seen in woodlands and fields, and even venturing into more urban areas at times. Being synonymous with Japanese everyday life, it's easy to see how the designers would want to immortalize such a well-known and recognizable animal in the Pokemon world. Now what really ties it to Deerling is the fact that Seeker deer are one of the few species of deer that retain the coloured spots on their back throughout their life. And as we can see in Deerling, this is a striking aesthetic feature that they both share, as well as the lighter coloured fur adorning the legs and underbelly, showing a clear divide to the deeper hues that grow on its back, adorned with those aforementioned different coloured spots. And furthermore, in the winter months, the fur of the Seeker deer grows a lot darker in order to keep it warmer, a trait which is seen in the changing darker hues of Deerling's winter form. Now, as fascinating as Deerling is with its real-world zoological inspirations, it's its evolution which raises the bar with its roots in mythology. First off, its name. A sawbuck is a device which holds wood in place so you can saw it into smaller pieces much more easy. Possibly pertaining to the wood that grows out of its head, but I think this is a bit too much of a stretch and it just seems to be a happy coincidence that it sounds like a pre-existing object. But its name can be broken down into buck, a term given to a male deer, which corresponds with Sawsbuck's design, as it's only the male deer which grows such magnificent horns, except in the case of reindeers. But the first part of its name is where it gets interesting, as it harks back to the gimmick for which this Pokemon was designed. Saws is an acronym for the 4 seasons: summer, autumn, winter, spring. And so within this Pokemon, within its appearance and name, you have all the seasons of the year. There is no question at all as to what this Pokemon represents. Whilst Deerling took inspiration from a deer which is overly abundant, Sawsbuck is inspired by one which was nearly extinct. The Milu is a deer which populated much of China. However, due to being hunted by humans, saw their numbers dwindle over the years. Dwindle to the point of being reduced to a single herd living within the walls of the Nanyuan Royal Hunting Gardens under the care of Emperor Tongzi. After 1895, when a flood from the Yongding River destroyed one of the walls of the garden and the deer escaped, got caught and eaten by the local starving peasants, there were fewer than 30 left. And when the Boxer Rebellion happened on the turn of the 20th century, it saw German troops invading the garden and shooting and killing the final few. The species was extirpated within China. But thankfully, 35 years prior to this event, a French missionary by the name of Armand David took a few of the Milu back to Europe, where they resided in the Berlin Zoo under the new moniker of the Pierre David's deer. Since Armand was a French priest, so Father David, Pierre David, a name that they are now identified as today. After finding out they were extinct in their native China, Herbrand Russell, the 11th Duke of Bedford, took a few of these animals from the Berlin Zoo back to his estate in Woburn Abbey in England, and it was here that he and his son set up a breeding program for them, keeping them protected through both world wars and ensuring the survival of the species. They grew to such stable numbers that in 1985 a herd of 20 were gifted by the Woburn estate back to China, and due to conservation efforts, the number of the Pierre David's deer in their native country is now approximately 2,000. The Milu's tumultuous existence, with their nearly being hunted off the face of the earth, is due in part to a 3,000-year-old tale. King Tzu of Shang ruled the land, but his empire soon fell into debauchery, and his cruelty spread throughout. The innocent people began to suffer and prepared for an insurrection. To defeat the king, a horse, a donkey, an ox, and a deer went into a forest together and practiced to be immortals. They finally succeeded, but realized they could not overcome the king and all his forces. And so they combined and transformed into one creature which possessed the speed of the horse, the strength of the ox, the donkey's keen sense of direction, and the nimble agility and antlers of the deer. This new animal, the Milu, then galloped to the Kunlun Mountains to seek the advice of the primeval Lord of Heaven. The Lord was astonished at the sight of the creature. "It's unlike any of those 4 creatures," he exclaimed. Upon learning of the animal's quest, Lord gave his blessing and dispatched the creature to Zhang Xia, who was leading the rebel fight against the tyrannical king. Zhang Xia rode the creature to victory over the king at the Battle of Mu and helped to start the Tzu dynasty. After fulfilling its vow, the Milu settled in the lower reaches of the Yangtze River. The animal became a symbol of good fortune and was sought by later emperors and their people who believed eating the Milu's meat would lead to an everlasting life and bring prosperity unto your household for generations to come. So not only does this story shine a light as to why this animal was hunted to such small numbers, the belief of consuming its meat bringing good luck and success to you and your family, but also helps to explain its somewhat unique appearance. It looks to be a conglomeration of 4 different animals and is described as having the nose of an ox, but not an ox, the antlers of a deer, but not a deer, the body of a donkey, but not a donkey, and the tail of a horse, but not a horse. Furthermore, its nickname in Chinese is Sibu Chang, which means 4 not alike, and that is why it is the perfect inspiration for Sawsbuck. As the Milu is made up of 4 different animals, Sawsbuck is made up of 4 different seasons. They are both 4 not alike. And so it seems only fitting that as Sawsbuck has multiple forms to represent the multiple seasons and is based on a deer which is made up of multiple animals, it also has multiple mythological design inspirations, moving from the ancient East to the relatively modern West. Baron Munchausen's narrative of his marvelous travels and campaigns in Russia is a 1785 book by German author Rudolf Erich Rasper detailing the exploits of one Baron Munchausen. Though the book is a work of fiction, it is loosely based on the real-life Hieronymus Karl Friedrich Freiherr von Munchausen, who wasn't very happy with his name and likeness being attributed to such a character. A libel suit was threatened, but it was never followed through with. The book follows the fictional Baron's adventures as he fights with alligators and rides on cannonballs and travels to the moon, and are intended as humour with a hint of social satire running throughout. And there is one tale out of the many that the Baron likes to tell, which is particularly pertinent to Sawsbuck. One day, as I was hunting and had spent all my shots, I unexpectedly met with a stately stag. It looked at me as unconcerned, as if he had known of my empty pouches. I charged at once with powder and a good handful of cherry stones upon it, for I had sucked the fruit as far as the hurry would permit. This I let fly at him, and hit him just on the middle of the forehead, between his antlers. It stunned him. He staggered. Yet he made off. A year or 2 after, being with a party in the same forest, I beheld a noble stag with a fine full-grown cherry tree above 10 feet high between his antlers. At once I recollected my former adventure, looked on him as my property, and brought him to the ground by one shot. This gave me the haunch and cherry sauce, for the tree was covered with the richest fruit, and I had never tasted anything like it before. And this is the precedent for a deer with a tree growing out of its head. And not just any tree, a cherry tree. And though cherry trees are different to cherry blossom trees, it's not too far a stretch of the imagination to see how this source of sauce could be transposed to the deciduously antlered Pokémon we've all come to know. So there we are. The zoological, geographical, meteorological, mythological origins behind 2 Pokémon which once served a purpose, but now serve as filler. But at least we can have appreciation for them all year round, no matter the season. And that, everybody, is a deep dive into the design origins of Deerling and Sawsbuck. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to give it a like and leave a comment if you learned something new. And also feel free to subscribe and stick around. There's going to be more deep dives into other Pokemon, but also other content as well. I'm currently playing through all of the Nintendo 64 games. I'm also doing reviews here and there. There's plenty for you to enjoy. But for now, my friends, luck and more to you all. Catch you next time.